we need it. So thank you, Greg, for being part of this symposium and the last symposium. And so it was really nice to have you. And of course, being another session, you'll have to again tell us about yourself, and then you'll have to give me a minute to just talk about the symposium and that, and then we'll go ahead with the topic. So please.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting me again in this important topic, Vikram. So I've been a mediator for more than 30 years, and I've been teaching mediation at university, privately, and doing training and workshops for about 26 years. So I'm a practitioner. So my background is I was a lawyer. I retired from law 25 years ago to do mediation, and I've done some arbitration and other matters too. So I'm really a full-time ADR person, you might say. I think when I started mediation, I was very lucky at the right time. There were a lot of work. I did a lot of court mediations very early on. But after a couple of years, the local university asked me of the law school and the social science school to teach mediation, which I did at an undergraduate level. And I'd go along to classes, and I'd do the role plays, and I'd talk about my experience in mediation. But after a year or so, he said, it's all going to be now online. You've got to provide the students with all the theory. And I thought, oops, I better have a look at theory. And when I did, it didn't speak to what I was doing. And so in the last 30 years or 25 years, I've been asking the question, what are we doing as mediators and why are we doing it? And I found the answers in a lot of various areas, in psychotherapy, in economics, in sciences, in philosophy, and which we talked about last time. And so that's my search. And so the question of neutrality is an interesting one that I've been pondering, like Bernie was pondering. What is this? What it didn't speak to me. So again, that's why I think I'm looking forward to this discussion with you today, Vikram.
So thank you. Yeah, I think it is a very important topic, because I mean, through the symposium also, we've been discussing this aspect, that where does it come from? And of course, why has it come? And should it be there? And all those things, of course, you are going to take us through that. But before that, what I will do is just give me 1 second to just, not just talk about it, just put the basic information out there. What we are doing here, what is the symposium, and to a certain extent, why that little quote from Desmond Tutu is where what I've been putting out there. So, that is one part also, which has also got a little dissected in terms of discussion. So this is what we're doing in neutrality and mediation, 12th to 16th. 12th, Bernie Mayer gave his keynote address, which of course very interesting, and his whole discussion on neutrality, which he's been doing for quite some time, he's been talking about it. So I think that he's had a book called Beyond Neutrality, and now Neutrality Trap. So if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Desmond Tutu. So this is what it's about. And maybe just a minute to put that website, because look, every session different people watch, and I need to tell people to go to the website, only because I feel that social media will never show you all the posts and you don't know what's happening. So it's better that you have a look at what's happening from here. I try to, of course, keep it updated, but sometimes I do get a little lax. So shows and events, actually there I put out the various ways that you can stay in touch and get information. And World Mediation Circle, definitely, Greg, at some time we'll talk about this, and of course the setting up the Australia Mediation Circle. So this is just a web of mediation circles in every community, country, and the humanistic approach which you talk about, that is where is the core value there, and we'll expand on it as we go along. And being part of it, for me, step one is now in clear that there has to be something that you give. So I put out something on patreon.com. So be a patron. What I put out there is $9. You can of course pledge more, but $9 a month. I just a coffee, maybe a snack with the coffee kind of thing. So that's about it, Greg. It's your show. I'm there, but I'm not there. So please.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to interact with you, Vikram, as we go. It's more Socratic approach to going from our last talk. But Vikram, I'd like to start it with an example of the only example in the history of mediation where a mediator was totally neutral. Now, how about one example? And that was a very close friend of mine, or a friend of mine and colleague called Pat Kavanagh. And Pat was on his way to a mediation, and he got stuck in traffic for about an hour, and he couldn't go anywhere. And he got a phone call from the mediation, and the lawyer said, "Hey, Pat, we've started without you, and we've settled it. So, Pat, you can go home now." And that, Vikram, is the only example I know in the history of mediation where someone has been completely neutral.
Yes, if that's the best way to be. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. But you could also argue, Pat, that Vikram, that Pat's empty chair was still a powerful force in the mediation, and that even that was not neutral. So this concept of I've never believed this concept of neutrality, because the mediation is the mediator, and I'm going to talk about a definition in a minute of on that, of how I see how we define mediation will take into this issue of neutrality. But we said to Pat, did you still charge? He said, of course. He said, yes, they had my photograph, and so yes, it was still a mediation, and So coming back to this concept of what is mediation and what is neutrality, the first thing I'd say, Vikram, I've never had to explain who I am as a mediator in all my years. I mean, people sometimes will confuse it with meditation, of course, in the early days. And when I've taught mediation, people want to know, the students want to know what it's about. But for a client or parties, I've never had to explain what it is. I've said I'm a mediator, and that's it. I've never felt the need to say I'm neutral, or I'm going to give you a just outcome, or I'm going to empower you. No, first of all, the parties aren't interested. They're interested in getting they're caught in the moment of the trauma of their conflict. If they've chosen me, they've chosen Greg Rooney, the mediator. And in a way, I have to build, it's me, I am the mediation. And what I might do now is put up, I might screen share my definitions of mediation as a basis for, oops, that's not the right one, go back. Screen share. Okay, this one. And okay, so this is a definition I've come to after 30 years of practice. And to me, it speaks to the closest thing I can see to mediation, what it's about. And I've defined it as a process of a mediator creating a venue where people get close to each other in order to move an issue forward. Now, in relation to the issue of neutrality, there's no mention of neutrality. And what I am suggesting is mediation is the mediator. You can't have a definition of mediation without the mediator. That's central. And that mediator is Mediator Vikram, it's Bernie Mayer, it's Ken Cloke, it's Greg Rooney. That's who mediation is. If we're not there, it's not mediation, it's negotiation. So and the other issue, the other thing that's really important for our profession, and I'm calling it a profession, I don't agree with the field issue. I think we need to move past that. The issue of the mediator is, I think, central to the whole core of what we do, and I believe that's really all we need to say. I'm the mediator. You get me, and I have to build the confidence in the parties. But the other thing I think to look at, and why I don't go into explaining that I'm impartial and I'm neutral, or I'm going to give a just out, I'm going to empower you, I don't need to explain that, because I don't see mediation as a static subject. I see it as something, what I call flow. And what it is that people are stuck. And when I get invited to be a mediator, I meet them at that point of stuckness, if that's a word. And so therefore, if I start talking about, oh, I'm neutral and I'm going to self-empower you, and I'm talking about the solution, a future, whereas I really have to get involved with them at the moment. So it's about mediating the moment. And I think the distraction of trying to explain who I am and why I do it and I'm going to help you, I do none of that. And I'll go through a more explanation of that in a minute. But coming back to the definition, I think the three aspects of mediation, and I've said this in the last one, is the first aspect, it forces you to do something. The power of mediation is you actually have to turn up and try and resolve it or be there. And this is really the challenge for the legal profession, because it prefers to stop the talk. Let's stand aside, pay us some money, we'll investigate, and after 6 or 12 months, we'll then do something. And it just freeze frames everyone. Whereas the power of mediation is, come on, let's turn up tomorrow, meet you at 10 o'clock, I'll have a chat with each of you, let's see how we go. Yeah, are you ready to do that? It's a very powerful thing. The second one is it's based on human interaction, and that's the complexity of human interaction, which I've talked to about before. And the third one, which relates to neutrality, it's the fundamental law of flow that guides all human activity. So mediation is really about necessary endings and new beginnings. And I think this is important for some of these issues that we mediators, the historical issues of mediation, like neutrality and balanced power. I go back, I remember an American family mediator in the 1990s called Joan Kelly. I haven't heard from her for a long time, but Joan Kelly, at that stage in the history of mediation, there was a big debate in the feminist movement saying, well, look, women should not go to mediation because they have a power differential. They're disempowered, and mediation will disempower them. And Joan Kelly's response was, power fluctuates throughout the whole mediation. And that is certainly my experience. Sometimes when the lesser power, person with the lesser power starts off, over time they actually get empowered, and the person who had the initial power starts to lose it, and it's a flow. So again, I come back, and I suppose I differ from Bernie's, when I listened to Bernie talking about that he explained his position. I think I don't do that mainly because I see this as a moment in time, and I'm dealing in that moment. And if I mediate the moment, the outcome will emerge out of that. So that's, I suppose, the first point is that that mediation is the mediator. And the other point I'd make is that we're so fortunate in our field, in our profession, is that mediation has huge recognition value in the world. For those that, certainly in Australia, every night on the news, there's something being mediated. Most lawyers know about mediation. Most parties know that's an alternative now. We're 30 years into our profession in Australia, and it's like I'm a doctor. People don't need to explain what a doctor does. They don't need to explain what a lawyer does. I don't think we need to start explaining what a mediator is. I am the mediator, you get me, and I have to earn your trust. So I'm going to talk about later the issue of if it's not neutrality, what it is. But I'll come back to that. So I'll just stop the screen share and we'll just go back to having a chat. Vikram, I suppose I wrote a paper on mediate.com a few months ago, a very short paper, in which I tried to explain what I do as a mediator. And I might just quickly go through it. It's very short. And the first thing I said is, I don't know what I do. I've got no idea what I'm going to do when I mediate a matter. Absolutely no idea. I'm a blank sheet. The only thing I do know is they're stuck. That's the only thing I know. And if they've got lawyers, the lawyers are stuck. And this is what I said. I don't have a toolbox of skills. I don't have any insightful questions. I don't apply any theory or mediation theory. I have no desire to change people or to teach cooperation or to understand their emotions or their so-called biases. I don't look for patterns. I don't create hypotheses, and I don't try and predict or control what will happen. As a mediator, I'm no hero. I don't seek to help. I don't seek to find a solution, and I'm not going to solve your problems. I'm a blank canvas with no answers. That's who you get. And that's the product.
Perfect. I think that's perfectly explained. That is how people can put it out. That's how the user will understand it. Let's not complicate the entire thing for the user by getting into words which they also do not understand. We don't understand the meaning of it. Do they understand it?
And I think they're in this process of crisis of wanting to resolve it, but don't know how to do it. So what they want is someone to be there and to provide a venue that hopefully moves them forward. So you see, when I say that moves it forward, I don't talk about settlement. And I think the power of the word mediation, and I become the mediator. Vikram, when you do it, you are it. You are mediation. You represent mediation. And as you would be if you're a lawyer or a doctor, you represent the medical profession. And I think we are selling ourselves. What I did go on to say in this short paper is all I do, I just get the interaction going and get out of the way. I allow things to happen and emerge, and I improvise. It's a multi-dimensional experience. It's noisy, messy, and imperfect, but that's the ingredient for change. So in a way, it's imperfect. And if I honor the parties by holding that space for them to be messy, it's out of that comes. So even though I'm a lawyer and I'm structured, I put that all aside. And one of the great influences of my career, I must say, when I had to write those papers and theory or find them for the university when I first started, I came across the work of Wilfred Bion from psychotherapy and an American called Thomas Ogden. And I think the way he put it is that, look, we all have to learn how to be a doctor, a lawyer, and a mediator. We have to practice. And it takes 3 or 4 years of hard practice for our brain to kind of get around the tools of mediation or law or medicine. But then we have to spend the rest of our career trying to overcome everything we've learned in order to practice, so that each time we come in, it's a fresh new day, as if we're recreating mediation afresh. So when they get Greg Rooney, the mediator, or Vikram, you're the mediator, they get a new experience where you're relearning the whole thing, but you're working with them. So, so again, I think I would differentiate a lot of the way I look at theory as a concept of flow, as opposed to static things like just outcomes, balanced power, and things like that. To me, they have no context, and everything I do in a mediation has context. So that's really the first point I want to make. The other thing, what I found interesting when I first looked at some of the theories of the traditional mediation theories, and I struggled with them. And I suppose the first thing first of all, I might say that I did meet Bernie in 1994. I went to CDR in Colorado and I did a course with Bernie on dispute system design. And it was a great experience going, and Bernie, a fantastic teacher, and his co-trainers, and meeting great people from lots of experience. But one of the things that came out of that conference or workshop was a comment, because it was about conflict being part of organizations, and conflict's good, it's a sign of change. So it was trying to look at from a systems perspective. But one of the sayings that came out that stood with me is that the question you ask in an organization, if your organization was to work well, tell me what it looks like. And to me, that was a question of moving from the past to the future. And that stayed with me as a big picture idea of what I was doing, because I always felt that I was standing in the future and the people wanting to talk about the past, and I'd be saying, guys, come over here. You know, you can, at 5 o'clock today, you can walk out of this with solved. Do you want to try it? Do you want to look? So again, you can see that issue of flow I keep bringing in. And I picked that up from that course. And the other thing that spoke to me when I first started about 1995 to start to look at theory was Ken Cloke's paper on mediating dangerously. And I read that and I said, that's what I'm doing. It's dangerous what I'm doing. I'm working in the messiness of it. And you see, those are the things that spoke to me. I did look at Christopher Moore's issue of hypothesis. You have to have a hypothesis, and I never had a hypothesis. John Haynes, a great mediator, used to talk about it's not whether you have a hypothesis, it's which hypothesis. And again, I didn't agree with it, but I've actually seen John Haynes mediate, and he actually works in the flow. So his theory he writes, I see as different than what he's actually doing. And I think a lot of us have these theories, but when we go into the mediation, we're doing all sorts of things. And so the other thing about Christopher Moore, he had this circle of causes and interventions. So yeah, if you had a cause and you list them all and you say, if this was the cause, this is the intervention. I didn't do anything. I wasn't even interested, because if I thought about that, I wasn't there. So in a way, I think a lot of, and I've said this in the last time, a lot of those early theories that came out were really because the legal profession and the social science profession said, you mediators, you're unlicensed lawyers or you're unlicensed therapists. You're doing the work of a therapist. You shouldn't be doing that. And we said, no, but we're neutral, you know, and so a lot of this is reaction. And I think I see it as historical. And I think they're interesting philosophical concepts. I use none of it as my mediation. I'm there, I'm like riding a surfboard down the wave. I'm just holding on and I can jiggle. It's a very minimalist thing. I spend a lot of my time just being silent and holding that space. So that's really what I wanted to talk about, the neutrality, and why I think we're not neutral. Everything we do has an effect, and that we should get away from neutrality. We should get away from trying to explain ourselves. We're just mediators, and we're a noble profession. And, you know, if I do a good job, I improve the profession. If I do a terrible job, I hurt the profession, like lawyers and doctors. So that's the sort of the big picture I was trying to talk about, Vikram, there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you started off with, creating a venue. I think we were in the last session with Herman talking about that safe space. So he was, in terms of neutrality, he was saying a neutral space, a safe space. So venue, I think that creating that and using those terms with the space, we'll have to discuss that, whether that's the way we are looking at it. And the mediation is the mediator, which you're emphasizing. I think that's what the key thing is. It's the individual that you go to. I think that's where a common thing of trust is coming out through all the sessions. Trust is a word which is definitely used everywhere. And when you said that the fact that you represent mediation, that's what is the most important thing. For me, that's the most important part of doing what I do. Get the right people out here to talk about it, because the fact that whom they have as a face of a mediator is important.
Yeah.
Because you're actually, like I said, as ambassadors of mediation to a certain extent. So I think the right faces have to be there. So which is what my job is, to get the right faces there. that's the difficult one, or the easy one. I don't know. It's easy. It's what I do.
Well, I think at the moment, certainly in the legal field, they feel more comfortable with retired judges and senior lawyers who they think is going to give them some sort of a guideline, because a lot of lawyers really afraid of mediation, the touchy-feely side of it, and they want to keep the parties apart. And so they feel, because look, I mean, I was a lawyer for many years. You're never quite sure. I mean, you tell your client your advice, but you don't hear the other side. So you're all in this fog, and it's only when you get to the court and it finally comes out and you listen to your own client getting cross-examined, you think, oops, he never told me that, you know. So lawyers work in a fog. So in a way, there's some belief that this magnificent judge is going to be able to hear both sides and give us an answer, because lawyers are always afraid of settling for too less, or that their client will say, you weren't a good enough lawyer, because, you know, so oftentimes that's the concept. But I think what's more and more happening, I'm getting a lot of work now where people say, I want you to be the mediator because you're not a retired judge. You're not going to tell them anything. They actually realize the blockage is not the law, but the emotional connection. And so I think a lot of lawyers are now becoming a lot more sophisticated in that respect. So I'm hopeful over the time we can develop that anyone, a butcher, a carpenter, an accountant, so anyone can be a mediator, because it's the trusted person. You know?
That's exactly, yeah. Well, that's the whole idea, because I'm telling you that, again, the discussion on colonization, decolonization, and mediation was important, because the conditioning of the mind of dispute resolution happening in courts and lawyers being a part of it, that's the fact that people think that way. So it is going on the same way. I think we have to disconnect that part, and mediation being a separate process, and where the courts should not have any role to play, because every country is connected with the courts, which definitely has to go out. That is totally out of it. I am saying that the courts should just not even talk about it. It's a different process. You don't have anything to do with it. But the way we were just talking about the last session also, that it's just suits their purpose, because they're inefficient. It's an inefficient system they've created for themselves, and picked up the colonizers process and everything, and they continued that. So for they have their reasons, vested interest to promote it within the court system, but it has to be disconnected for sure. But only thing I think, what Greg, we love to, during the thing, whenever you have to touch upon this aspect about, as I hear in Australia, you are talking about only the facilitation and no more. So that part of it, you have to just, I mean, is that the way you look at it, and how does that affect the process?
Well, I was facilitating mediator. I sold my practice 1996, so I don't have a practicing certificate. So I can't, even though I'm a lawyer and I'm admitted in the courts, I'm admitted in New South Wales, Queensland. To practice, I would have to go and get my certificate again. So I can't give legal information. I can't give advice. So I don't do that, because I can't do it. And I don't do it. I mean, I can give information. I can reality test. And, you know, I can do that. And I can certainly stop a mediation if I think someone is not being, should be going to a lawyer and get proper advice. I'd have no problem with that. But the courts are there as a backup, when all else fails. But I think that what I'm saying is that that's my role, and I get work for that reason. But it doesn't mean I always facilitate, because there are times when you can't, because of violence, and parties aren't quite ready. And I want to now talk about the intake, which I think is the crucial part of all mediation, which is sadly neglected in training. You know, people, it should be the number one thing you learn is an intake. And the reason for that is that when we talk, coming back to this concept of neutrality and Greg Rooney, the mediator, it is the intake where I establish my, whatever we want to call other than neutrality, that person of me is where I establish it. So, and so I just want to talk about that as the starting point, as a replacement for neutrality in those concepts. Because what I do in the intake, the first thing I do is I say, hello, I'm Greg, nice to meet you. I do the politeness, you know, welcome, thank you for inviting me, and I just want to introduce myself. So that's very formal, but it's a very powerful thing, because you've honoured me to ask me to come into your dispute, and I'm honouring you. And the first question I ask you is an open question. What's your thoughts about meeting George next Tuesday? And I sit and listen. And that's where I start my, whatever we want to call the thing we're not calling neutrality. Let's call it the X factor for the moment. Whatever that X factor I'm trying to achieve, and it's me and it's building. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to form a base of where both parties are at the moment. And it's through both that connection. How are you going? What's your thoughts? And I'm not talking about what I'm doing. I'm not saying I'm going to help you. I'm not doing any of that because they don't know that yet. And I'm trying to get a sense of who they are, where they are emotionally, and I'm trying to get their story privately at the beginning before, so I want to hear their story. And that's my bedrock. That's my foundations for the mediation. And in holding that through the intake, and then when the joint session, I ask them to talk, and I hold their stories, and I'm the holder of their talk, and I make it 2 stories into 1 story. The joint story. You've both got a problem. You both love your children. You're both suffering in this business, whatever. And so I am the holder of the story. So what it is, it's not neutrality. It's a very powerful connection I have with the parties, and I build their trust, and this trust. So I would say, let's replace neutrality with trust, but you've got to earn it. You just can't come in and say, trust me, I'm the mediator. You've got to earn it right from the first moment, and you've got to hold it for 3 hours or 10 hours or however you got to do it. And oftentimes when we're in the really heat of the mediation and it's really stuck, I can go back and revisit that first meeting. George, Mary, I said to you, what's your thoughts now? How are you feeling? Oh, I can go back and bring them back to that human level. That's the humanistic aspect. And then we get back in and try and negotiate the differences, and then we go back to the human. So in a way, it's not neutral. It's trusting. It's me, but it's me. And I have to earn that. And if I say something that loses a bit of trust, I've got to regain it. And oftentimes that's a part of the mediation where it starts to go backwards. But that's an important turning point in the mediation, because I've now opened up an issue that's been hidden, and I've got to deal with it. I've got to start the mediation again there. So you see, it's all about flow, and it's about thing. And so I can't help them. All I can do is hold that. So I just wanted to say, intake is where you get the trust, and it replaces all these issues of power and balance, just outcomes, self-empowerment. It's a living thing in context, in flow. And as Joan Kelly says, it flows all over the place. So that's I think that's the missing element here that I think might, if we add that into the neutrality issue, might make it a bit more clearer.
Well, I think this aspect of, like I said, trust is coming up in the discussion, and the way I'm looking at it and promoting it, and these mediation circles, is that we start with trust. So the people that we are saying in the communities who already have that trust and have the mediator mindset, when we are taking them along, that aspect is also gone. So you're not at all points of time just even looking at, oh, I have to earn the trust. It is a taken and a given. Yeah. And we are just flowing with it, because what happens is that if you're looking at it as, okay, I have to earn that trust, so you might not be yourself, because you'll have to, and there's no time to think. I mean, it's a moment that is going to go wherever it has to go, and you don't know. And so you should not have any restraint or even a thought process as to what am I doing the right thing? Is what I'm doing, will it earn their trust or not? So I'm looking at it from that perspective. Be who you are, which is what you said. You are there, you are the person, it's the person, and just be yourself. So it's not, let's go to a mediator, let's go to Greg, he's going to help us. And that is the word of mouth thing which will happen. And that's the way it has going to go forward. And this is the way it was earlier. I mean, that's the way it was in communities. There was this individual. So you said, let's go to that person. So you were not saying, let's go to a mediator. The word has come up. I mean, using mediation and mediator, those words, that people connect with the person and the process. They don't connect with these words, and that's what we have to do. Yeah.
And I think Bernie said it about sometimes in Indigenous communities, you want someone who's trusted, who knows everyone, the relationship. So by talking about neutrality, it cuts out those people. Whereas I think, say, the mediator is the trusted person, and that you choose Vikram. I think Vikram will be the person I'll have as a mediator, because we think Vikram will be Vikram, and he will be with George and Mary, and he's got a venue. It's next Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. We're going to turn up, so something will actually happen. So that to me is mediation. But Vikram, you're just saying then about, and I think we need to ask the question, well, if it's not neutral, what is it? And I think it's I call it mediating without mediating. And it's like teaching without teaching. The best teachers are the ones that don't, and that's the art. And I found, again, when I, to try and explain what I was doing, I found a lot of it in psychotherapy. And again, I come back to this Thomas Ogden, the American psychotherapist from the British School. And he said many good things, but this is, I think, the key, of how to do it. He said, don't project, and he's talking as a psychotherapist, but I'll use it as a mediator. He said, don't project your personality. Get rid of your personality. Become less definitely yourself. So I've got to become less Greg. Greg, I'm out there, I can spruik and I can do all that and song and dance, but I've got to get rid of Greg. In other words, I've got to be less Greg. And I've got to create a space where we enter a shared state of intuiting by becoming one in the unfolding moment of reality. So Greg has got to become less Greg, because George and Mary are kind of not George and Mary, because they're uptight and angry and stuck. They're not thinking rationally. So I can't throw mine on top of that. That makes three. We've got to keep it at the two. So I've got to get rid of that. And what he says, it actually, by doing that, it creates what he calls a third space. That separates the mediator from the parties. So I actually created an empty space there, although I'm still Greg. I don't lose Greg, but I'm depersonalized Greg. I'm there, and what it does is that we actually all now experience, and I start to experience their moment. So intuitively, I know I can make intuitive decisions as what to do next, because I'm less of a Greg wanting to help and to solve their problem and give them power. I've got rid of all that. He doesn't exist at the moment. As Ogden says, I've got to recreate it again, as if I'm doing my first mediation. And then what happens is a voice comes out, the voice of the mediation. And what happens, I think, is parties can now speak through that voice in ways they couldn't speak beforehand. So it actually creates a new person that we can now speak. And I think after 3 or 4 hours or 9 hours of mediation, people start saying things they couldn't have said at the beginning. And I think that's the flow again. And so that is, to me, I don't want to use the word neutrality, but that is the concept, the X factor I'm calling, that's not neutrality. It's that voice that comes out. And it's not me, and it's not even them, it's the group. And that is the X factor, we call it, I'm calling it. But we've got a show called X Factor, so I'm using that. And there's a lot of theory that comes from that. And I'll just go through them. Starting with Sigmund Freud, he had the same problem. How do you deal with, working with it? It's like, and he came up with something called evenly suspended attention. And this was in 1913. He said it consists simply of not directing one's notice to anything in particular and maintaining an evenly suspended attention in the face of all that one hears. In this way, we spare our strain of our attention, which could not be kept up for hours, because, we have to be in a mediation for an hour or two. We avoid the danger which is inseparable from the exercises of deliberate intention. As soon as we deliberately concentrate on a certain degree, we begin to select material. One point is fixed in your mind with that clearness, and you discard other points. So you start focusing, and that's not what you got to do. And you start following your expectations. This, however, is what should not be done. In making the selection, if you follow your expectations, you're in danger of never finding out anything but what you already know. You end up just confirming what you know. It's what you don't know is what we're looking at. And if he follows his inclination, he will certainly falsify what he may receive. It must not be forgotten that what things that one hears are for the most part things whose meaning is only recognized later on. So you can only understand things at the end of the mediation. Oh, that's what happened. All right. But if you stop and start focusing on it, and that's what a lot of lawyers do, you miss what else is going on. And that's just simple exercise. And Wilfred Bion talks about zero thinking and reverie. You just sit and just be there. And that's intuition. The Christians call it holy indifference, and the Hindus call it non-attachment. So again, we go back to philosophy and to history. Zen call it the don't know mind, and so it's not neutral. It's that X quality of reverie, of just being in the space. And the Bhagavad Gita says again, you've got to find your true self, free to be in the moment, to become less of oneself. That whole concept. So again, coming back to this, I'm a neutral and I want to help you and all this, that's ego in a way. It's us wanting to say, look, we're really good. We're going to help you. We're going to rescue you. We've got all these magic toolbox of skills we're going to use, and just trust us. No. You start by saying, how are you? Welcome. Thank you for inviting me into your spirit. Tell me what it's about. Talk to me as a human. And we humans connect with each other. That replaces neutrality as far as I can see. And as someone said, this concept, this is not something you do just before the mediation. This is a lifetime of work. It's a whole lifetime to doing this, to be able to spend your attention and to actually be there and feel the feelings. And again, I think that's part of what I do. I've done a lot of work with victims of abuse. You've got to be able to feel it, but not be, can't overwhelm me. So it protects me, because I'm not going to help you. I'm going to be there for you. Because once you start helping, you start to become like a parent and child, and that breaks the relationship. And that's a big no-no in psychotherapy and so on. And I think it's a danger in mediation that when you want to help, you start getting into a parental role, which is a moral role, which we've got to get rid of. I know there's a lot of views within the religious community about the moral aspect of mediation, which that's a result. Mediation can have wonderful outcomes, but you're not there yet. You've got to be with the moment at the terrible, dirty, rough part. You can't just look ahead to the outcome and say, look at that great over there. The sky, the future's there. That's disrespecting, in my view. And it's not real, and it's not where they are. You've got to you've got to get in the mud with them, but provide a safe place for that, and walk the miles with them. And in the end, it has religious benefits and so on, but we have to, we have to earn our trust. And after the mediation, we can look back and theorize about what happened and so on. We can write lots of papers about it. But the next day, you've got to go in and start again as if it's your first one.
Perfect. Yeah. So but the thing is that we were talking about with Herman this last session, that neutrality, whenever we talk about it, the aspect of the mediator being neutral and the word being connected to the mediator, should we not look at the word being connected to the process, and the space? So the process and the space, and let's look at it from that perspective. So this also, Greg, you'll have to, in some way, throw some light on whether the space is neutral, whether the process is neutral. Some thoughts on that.
Well, my thesis and my argument is when you talk about the process, you're talking about flow, because the process is one point of time, next point of time, and so on. And so I think, I suppose what I have a different lens or a prism I look through. I'm not looking through the static, what's the toolbox of schools, what's this? I'm looking through the static of a flow, and there's no answer. Life is not an answer. Life is, all we have is the very moment we are sharing now, Vikram. That's life. In half an hour's time, it'll be different. An hour before it was different. And that's, to me, is what that if we think in that concept, then we see the parties stuck in the flow. And then we have to then be with them. And that, to me, is the process of being there and honouring them. So if you look at it through that lens, I think you see things differently. And then all these other static theories, which, historical theories and intellectual stuff, we're trying to, say what we're doing. I think it's far more simple, but that makes it far more complex. And that's the challenge. Mediated. Yeah.
No, please. You're saying something. You were saying something. I cut you off.
That's what I mean. Mediating without mediating. No. I'm there, but I'm not doing the mediation. I'm not pulling out my toolbox. I'm not. This is my hypothesis. Doesn't mean at various stages I won't say something. I won't do an intervention. I won't do something, but it's all in the flow context. I'm not doing nothing. But it's intuiting at the right time. So doing something now will be okay, but in 5 minutes' time, it won't be okay. So if you think of the flow, it's what am I in the moment? Yeah. And the question, what is happening here is the question, the mediator question, what's happening? Yeah. And that means you're in the moment. Now, although I said about going to Colorado and talking about what it looks like, if things work well, what it looks like. What to me is that I have to trust that my honouring them is that I am saying that at 4:00 this afternoon we can settle this. I trust, even if in front of me I think, God, this is not going anywhere. If I start thinking it's failing, they will pick it up. They'll listen to me. That intuitive, they'll think he's given up and they'll give up. So even in the most horrific parts of the mediation, I still have to have that confidence. And that came from that, you can sort it out. Yeah.
So what I'm looking at it from the blank canvas, blank sheet of paper concept, that at every point of time in relation to the mediator, the process and the space, it's all the time a blank canvas or a blank sheet of paper. And it's a dynamic concept, but still the baggage of what happened in the last moment doesn't have to be carried forward. So it stays that neutral space, if you want to call it. Look, that word, I'm just using that word because it came up in terms of the space and the process. But in terms of the neutrality of the space and the process and the mediator, we are looking at a blank canvas or a blank sheet of paper throughout. And from there, whatever is developing is going to go into the next moment, but still staying a blank canvas, something like that. I don't know. We're just working it out, Greg. We don't know. We're just thinking about it.
But Vikram, I would argue that the blank space is anything but neutral, because the blank space allows that voice to come out. That's not neutral, and I'm part of it. I'm not a innocent bystander standing away. And without me, if I walk out the room, it doesn't exist. And I've said this before, that if my mind wanders in the mediation, suddenly the parties will say, I've lost my train of thought. I'm not neutral. There's no way it's neutral. And they're getting Greg Rooney, but they're getting a kind of a empty Greg Rooney that's actually drawing them into a sort of a process, or you want to use the word process, or a void, where they're actually finding their voices. So that's not neutral. So I really have the problem with the neutral. I agree with Bernie. It's a problematic thing, and but I think maybe we don't need a word. I call it X factor, just for the sake of it. Maybe we don't need a word. It's that intangible thing of mediating without mediating, and so Yeah, I agree with Bernie on the word, and I think he's on the right track. Yeah.
So Greg, I think what we're going to is again back to my symposium on heart, soul, spirituality. There is a presence. Greg's presence does something. So the X factor that you're talking about is Greg bringing in that X factor, a presence which has maybe nothing to do with words or anything, is just being you, and you're there. And how that happens, do we really need a word for it? Do we need to even understand it? Do we understand it? Can we understand it? So I think those are the things which were part of that. That was the idea, to bring those things out in the last symposium on that, because there is something to that which can't be explained maybe, but it definitely exists. And take you out, will it be the same? No, it will not.
And just on the issue of what you would call it, I know the Tao calls it the 10,000 things. So yeah, the 10,000 things. There's no answer. And I think that the mystery that there is an answer. And I think one of the problems we've got, we're trying, because mediation is trying to establish itself, we want to, we're fighting to be a profession. I mean, I think we will get to a profession where we're confident to say we don't have to tell them what we are. You're getting Vikram. That's mediation. You are a mediator, and that's what you're buying, and that's what you think. And we don't have to explain it. And the more we try to explain it, the more we fail to, So the confidence of not explaining it is I think that's when we'll become a true profession. And it's as I said, it's the Tao, it's the 10,000 things. It's that the answer of no answer. Yeah, that's.
You'll hear me say that a lot of times. I said there's so much happening here, which actually there are no words for all that. It's just happening, and let it happen the way it has to happen. Do we need words? That's the thing. But Greg, at some point in time, you're going to tell us about your Tuscany retreat and what happens there, and with the kind of thoughts that you have. What do you bring there? That is going to be interesting. So the Tuscany retreat, let's hear about that.
Yeah. Well, we 2012. Myself, my wife, Margaret Ross, who's a mediator for 30 years, and a colleague from England, Barbara Wilson, she's practicing for 30 years. And we were talking about we'd like to do something in Europe, and because we go over. So I knew of this vineyard in a little town called Luculino. It's halfway between Florence and Siena. It's a little village on the top of a hill, and the winery at the bottom of the hill has been there for 1,000 years, well, the building. And we rang them and they said, yeah, come and you can use our hall, and we've got accommodation. So we emailed all our friends and everyone we knew, and we got 15 people and partners coming. And we sat down and we had 5 days. It's a 5-day, start on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday's off, Thursday, Friday. And the first time Margaret and Barbara and I sat around and said, well, what the hell are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And we realized that these were very experienced mediators, as we were, and we really couldn't teach them anything. But what they lacked was that they were always working by themselves, and there's no way of. So what we thought was, if we, through a number of processes, allowed them to debrief themselves virtually over the course of the week, and they would. What we said really was that you think you're coming to a 5-day mediation retreat, and you think, wow, I'm going to learn so much, and the next Monday when I go back to my practice, I'm going to have all this more information. And we said, if we did that, we would fail. We want you to go back with empty heads. We want to clear your empty baggages. And so what happened, I think, is it allowed everyone to debrief. And over the week, because we have these long table lunches, Tuscan lunches, and we all sit around next to each other. And over the week, you get to meet everyone. And so that's how it evolved. And this is our night. We're going back next June, and this is the 9th time we've run it. And because we've had a few years off with COVID, we got booked out within a week, and we got a waiting list. And they're from all over the world, very experienced mediators from England. We've got Greece, one of our colleagues from Greece that's been on with you is coming, and North America, and the Caribbean, and a lot of Australia and New Zealand. And each one we kind of mediate it. It's like a 5-day mediation, where we just throw little things in and the people come out. And so we're experiencing as much as they are. So, and what we find is that it's such a quiet village, and half our job's done because people just can't, in a 1,000-year-old quiet village and we walk up into the evening into the town and all sit around having dinner, and all the partners would go off in the daytime and do their thing, and we'd all join at night. So it became lots of groups, and each year the combinations will make it a different one. Sometimes you have lots of lawyers, sometimes no lawyers, sometimes we have a combination of both. And so it really is. I think it really is a very a time of quietness and reflection. That's what I would say at school.
I think a very nice concept. But are you curating the group, or it just comes in terms of first come, first serve kind of thing, or are you curating them?
Well, first come, first served. We have over the years, a lot of people said they I can't come this year, but they've been. We have a list of people who they want. So this next time we've got 2 people coming for the 3rd time and 2 people the 2nd time. So that they wanting to get back and enjoy it again. So we get some repeat people, but it's word of mouth, and we do a bit of advertising on LinkedIn, and people connect, and
But
it's.
I would think that curation also might be an important aspect to it. Is it or not? Or let it be as random as it has to be?
And that's the beauty of it. I mean, we generally ask people, and generally as experienced mediators, it's 5 days, so it's a big commitment. And what we do is the journey there is as important. So we help organising them, and we put them in all separate rooms. There's lots of accommodation there. And then we get them to meet in Florence on the Saturday at lunchtime, and they all get on a bus and come. By the time, and we give them their details of each's background, and so they all can see each other. By the time they get there, they're kind of on the journey. The journey is the important part. So when they come there, they kind of know each other, and it's a sort of like a welcoming, even that. And of course, there's so different backgrounds. We've had them from all over the world, and with different experiences. Some in peacekeeping, some in workplace, some in law, some in therapy, all sorts, in mining and industrial. So everyone learns from each other, and that's the ingredient. And Margaret and I, Barbara's retired at the moment, but Margaret and I facilitate that, and, allow them to come out of themselves, and we all learn. We had a group of Finnish mediators who were training in schools, and 5 of them came, and they taught us all the games that they used for the school children. So we were playing these games, which was fantastic, So and one thing about mediators are a lot of fun. I love being with mediators because they can talk they can talk about their experiences, and they're generally fairly open and, I would say, charismatic people. So it's really quite an energy,
But you're not giving it any direction. The discussion can go where it has to go. It's not.
Well, we have little things we do that actually create interaction. So it's a bit like a mediator. What I said in my thing is that I create, we get an interaction going, and we get out of the way and watch it. So we will do various little exercises, but it's not teaching, it's allowing the interaction. And where it leads to, we'll then come back. And each morning we start off with a silent walk in the village, and then we sit around a tree and we just reflect on the previous day, and lots of silence. And then you can hear the church bell ring on the hour, and you hear and everything's quiet in the middle of the day. And then at dusk, they all come out and sit on their front verandas, and we walk up through the town. So you become part of the community over the week, So it's like an experiential, no tourists, and it's experiential. And I think that's the concept of having time and space that we lack as mediators. We're always running around.
Because I'm just thinking that this concept I should develop in the online world, because this is something which the Mediator Reflects was a series which I started with Michael Lang, which we will continue. So I think that's something I will pick up from this concept, something that people can come in, because for me, look, the thing is that what you are doing in that space with 15 people, I want it to be out there for people to watch, because what thoughts would come out there, discussions which would come out there, will be useful to people around the world.
Mm.
And so for me, everything ultimately goes out on YouTube. My concept is it should not be restricted, because those people have so much to contribute to the mediation world. So I'm thinking of how to do that in the online world, and
Yeah.
create a certain, let's call it an event or whatever. That's it. I'm thinking about it, how, because I mean, I have that forum series where definitely we have a discussion on
Yeah.
topics. We do that. So no, it's interesting. Something that I think that what you're doing, I think really is required. But only thing is, how do we get it out there for a lot of people to watch what you're doing? So either we put cameras in your rooms, in that large hall of yours, and let that be broadcast live. If that can happen, that would be ideal. But how do, I mean, I would want that. That's exactly what I've been trying to do. I said, like Ken Cloke, he has so much to give to the world, and to limit him to 20 people or 30 people in that Zoom session is not fair. So
Mm.
that's why it is all put out there, which of course turns out in relation to whether people value that free thing. That's the only thing that is, which I feel that is, that is, because they, to take that for granted, and okay, Ken is talking, okay, we've have the opportunity to watch it, it's free, do you value it? Because people paid hundreds or maybe hundreds of dollars to even get into a session with Ken, and
Yeah.
he's being so nice to be able to put it out there for everyone. So that balancing, where you value free things or not. So if we broadcast what you are doing there, are people going to value it, or is it something which needs to be only to few people who actually value it?
Well, I think what the difference is, I mean, a lot of people would be interested in a lot of the things that come up, and that's the intellectual side. But I think what we're providing for those people is a side to um, unburden themselves, because we take on the burdening of our work, and oftentimes within the group there'll be someone who's had a difficult time, and what happens is the other people come around and support them, and they'll sit and have a quiet word over the week. They'll have so there's a lot of it's a healing thing, and so it is quite different. That wouldn't come out by videoing, because oftentimes, and so I think it's a different concept, and the human connection. I think we as mediators, although there's a lot of online stuff now, the art of being physically present is still a valuable art for us. You can still do it in the online, but I think having the space in our busy lives, and I think COVID has changed that. I think we've moved to the village. We're moving back to the village. People wanting more time. So I think what we're offering in this, is really a chance to, and I would encourage others to do similar things. It's not, we don't own it. It's and people are welcome to take on the model. And we've actually developed something. We've built on our property here in Australia in Cove. We've built a place, a really lovely site. We might run some here for the people wanting to come. But I would encourage that time of mediators having time and space to be with each other, and just not having to learn nothing new, because we know it all. It's unpacking it and reassembling our heads, because we carry a lot. We don't. I'm fortunate. My wife and I can debrief each other each day over dinner of our mediations, but a lot of people don't have that, and it's just, and it's that camaraderie and that ability to know you're not alone.
No, no, I
So I
don't
think,
know. Yeah, no, because the things that I do, all these discussions that I have, I don't even think that this is being put out on YouTube. It's just
yeah,
those conversations, because people don't realize, like this conversation we are having, or any conversation, that you have so much to bring in, and even that one sentence that you give, you might think this is, well, it just comes out as a normal sentence, but someone somewhere in the world picks it up. Some sentences people get inspired by. So I'm just saying that, look, I feel mediators are special. So, and whatever they have to say, it should be available for people to hear, because
yeah,
they come from a very different space. And this is the whole idea of with this World Mediation Circle, to bring out these people with the mediator mindset, because in the communities, finally, we want them as leaders. And which is what Sarah Blake, who's also in Australia, we discussed this as part of the symposium in that heart soul spirituality thing, that in these indigenous leaders, they have that mindset. So that's why the idea being that whatever you put out there, whatever you have to say, let it go out, let people listen to it. They're words of wisdom. They're words of wisdom. Finally, look, whether, I mean, in terms of, people might look at it as making mediators in 40-hour factories, but actually that evolution of a mediator and the wisdom that comes from there, I think that is something which really is something which is beneficial to people in various parts. So that's why this whole YouTube thing, because it's easy for me. I mean, in relation to that, what do I do? I mean, everything is all free content. It's easy for me to say, like everyone does, okay, let's call Ken. We'll take so much for people to attend that session. And that's what happens everywhere. But then how do that, all those words of wisdom of Ken's, why should not they be available to everyone? So for me, now I started putting this out on Patreon, that become a patron. This is something that I did now. I used to say, send a gift, and obviously no one does it. Everything, like I said, free things are not valued. But I don't want to cut that off. I don't really want that to happen. That be available. People, whether they value it or not, that's another thing. So Greg, what you brought in, of course, is really interesting aspects, which I think people, if they pick it up, and these discussions have to happen. So thank you very much. And of course, concluding remarks, your last word, please.
Well, I just thank you, Vikram, for all the work you do to do that. And I think it's that connecting us around the world. And I think one of the things now with our modern technology is that I don't have to travel to Boulder, Colorado to see Bernie, although I'd love to do it and love to see, physical, but we can still communicate. And I'm encouraging, and as I said last time, we have a whole host of mediators who've been practicing for 30 years that are nearing retirement. And so it's time now to put things down, and what you're doing, getting the words down before we all retire. And the wisdom of the practitioner who's been practicing, as opposed to these theories that have been around for decades that, to me, are sort of a bit cold and intellectual. We need the theories, the intangibleness of mediation, the magic of mediation, and honoring it by the word mediator. And the mediation is the mediator. That's the word I want to say. Mediator is the mediator, and you mediate without mediating. They're the two sayings I would pass on.
Oh, amazing, important last words. And Ken's new book is Magic in Mediation. He's writing that. So that's something, magic in mediation. We'll have discussions on that, which I was telling Ken also, that we'll have these short sessions with people who will talk about magic in mediation. So that's coming up, and you will also it won't be too long. The idea being that today there are certain in terms of people's retention power, or how much they can actually watch. Those are shorter videos, so that's going to go out. So please be prepared for a magic in mediation session that you'll have to do with me. Which will, I don't know, I can't decide how much time should we give to it. 20 minutes? Is 20 minutes okay? Or less?
Well, 20 minutes and 10 minutes for questions.
You want questions, or you just want to talk about it? Just
I often think it's good to have a moderator like yourself, because when you talk, you kind of you can go off. I certainly go off in tangents. So to have someone there as a moderator, just for the last 10 minutes to clarify and maybe say, look, did we get that right? Is that what you're meaning? And just as a rounding off thing, I think that's often good.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
As the observer.
Because normally, look, whenever people talk about social media and these videos, one thing comes up is that there is a 7-minute kind of retention thing. So that's one clip that you could have. The other is about 20 minutes. Yeah. And I never followed that, because I felt these conversations are important. Let them go. And the people who really want to listen to it will listen to them. So I never looked at time at all. But for certain things, I think I'll have to put these shorter ones. So we'll do that, and we'll discuss it, how we have to take it forward. So Greg, thank you very much. And I know that the closing session is going to be middle of the night for you. The issue is that, look, for Ken, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. So I am going to ask him later. What we're going to do is his evening. Today we had Milan Slama. Milan was there. I don't know whether you've heard him. He's really, you have to hear this session.
Yeah.
He's also in Pacific time, but we did it at 8 p.m. his time. So I'm
Yeah.
going to ask Ken if he can give us that time. Then I think Australia it'll be easier for you people. So I'll work that out, because up till
Well,
now
I
it's
watch it when I get up in the morning, so it's not a problem. So when I wake up, it's there, and I can sit over breakfast and listen to it quietly. Yeah.
but we'll have some participative thing also we'll
Yeah.
have to do. So we do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so great. Thank you very much. And I'll see you. Please attend any of the sessions
Yeah.
whenever if you have time. So thank you very much. And we'll have the events in 2023. I'll take your time and send you a schedule. Let's do interesting things there.
Thanks, Vikram. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.